When Walt Brennan died after 38 years as a paramedic, his children divided what he left behind in less than a week. The house sold in 4 days. The savings split before the headstone was even set. His son Garrett took everything worth keeping. His daughter Nadine got what nobody else wanted: a rusted out ambulance her father had bought at a county auction, 3 boxes of old uniform, and a set of keys to a vehicle she couldn't even afford to tow. She had almost nothing left in her bank account. A nursing license she hadn't touched in 7 months, and a memory she couldn't put down. So on a cold Saturday morning, she finally climbed inside that old rig to clean it out and sell it for scrap. That's when she found it. Bolted flush with the floor, hidden under the stretcher mount, was a steel compartment no factory had ever installed, welded by hand, painted to disappear. And what her father had sealed inside that compartment was something no one in the Brennan family knew existed. Her brother had called this ambulance scrap metal, a rusted hunk of junk not worth the cost of towing. He had no idea what was underneath the floor. He had no idea who their father really was when no one was watching. This is the story of the ambulance nobody wanted, and the daughter who finally opened the doors. The funeral lasted 40 minutes. The dividing of her father's life lasted 4 days. Nadine Brennan stood in the kitchen where she grew up and watched her brother tape cardboard boxes shut. Fast, too fast. The way a man packs when he's moving, not when he's grieving. Garrett had called the real estate agent the morning after the funeral. The morning after. A woman in a gray blazer walked the rooms with a clipboard, measuring square footage and natural light, while their father's coffee mug still sat in the dish rack. Still had a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. Nobody had washed it. "We'll list at $260, Garrett said, sealing another box. "Market strong, won't take long." Nadine just looked at him. "Dad's been gone 3 days, and the mortgage is due in 12. He set the tape gun down, looked at her like she was the one being difficult. "I'm not heartless, I'm practical. Somebody has to handle this." Somebody, that word did a lot of work for Garrett. His wife stood in the doorway the whole time, scrolling her phone. She'd come inside long enough to claim the antique hutch and their mother's china. The rest, she said, wasn't worth renting a truck for. So Nadine watched the furniture go. The recliner where her father fell asleep every Sunday with a baseball game murmuring on low. The kitchen table where he ate the same breakfast for 40 years. 2 eggs, wheat toast, black coffee, never changed. Never once in 40 years. The nightstand with a sticky drawer where he kept a photograph of their mother tucked behind his reading glasses. All of it gone in 4 days. Garrett kept the truck. He kept the savings account, the one they all knew about, just over $19,000, after he subtracted what he called executor's fees and funeral costs. He kept the tools from the garage and sold most of them to a pawn shop before Nadine even knew they were missing. What he didn't want was the ambulance. It sat in the driveway like something the world had given up on. A 1998 Type 3 unit, faded red and white, rust crawling up the wheel wells, a cracked side mirror held on with a wrap of electrical tape. Their father bought it from the county 8 years ago when they decommissioned the old fleet, paid cash, drove it home. And nobody in the family ever understood why. "It's scrap metal on wheels," Garrett said, dangling the keys between 2 fingers. "Best the junkyard would give me is $300, but you'd have to tow it yourself. Towing costs more than the thing's worth." He dropped the keys on the counter, next to 3 cardboard boxes. Dad's personal stuff from the rig, uniforms, old gear. I went through it. Nothing valuable. Nadine picked up the keys. They were still warm from his hand. A plain steel ring. A faded paper tag that read Unit 7, Ridgemont County EMS. "That's it," she said. "What else would there be?" She looked around the kitchen. Half empty already. Already becoming somebody else's house. "Nothing," she said. "I guess that's it." And that was how Nadine Brennan inherited the thing nobody wanted. She had no idea it would save her life. The ambulance sat in a storage lot out on Route 4, wedged between a boat on a trailer and somebody's forgotten RV. The lot charged $12 a day. She'd been paying it for 6 days because she couldn't figure out what else to do with it. $12 a day she did not have. Her apartment was a 1-bedroom above a dry cleaner on Birch Street. The heat worked when it felt like it. which lately was almost never. The landlord had started leaving notes, first polite, then pointed. 3 envelopes sat unopened on her counter, stacked next to a pile of medical bills and a letter from Street Luke's Human Resources. The letter asked, very gently, about her intentions regarding her employment status. 7 months. 7 months since she'd worked a shift. 7 months since Renata. Nadine didn't say the name out loud anymore. She didn't have to. It lived in her chest like a stone she carried everywhere. Renata Sandoval, 26 years old, a first-time mother who came in bleeding and frightened, and Nadine had been the nurse on shift. The delivery went sideways fast. Hemorrhage, the kind that doesn't give you time to think, only react. And Nadine reacted. She did everything right. Everyone said she did everything right. The baby lived, the mother didn't. And there was a moment, 4 minutes maybe, where Nadine had held that young woman's hand and watched her eyes and told her, "You're okay. You're gonna be okay. Hold on. Hold on for me." And the grip had gone slack anyway. She replayed those 4 minutes every night, counting them, stretching them, trying to find the version where she moved faster, thought clearer, saw it coming sooner. There was no version like that. There was only the version that happened. She quit the following week. Told HR it was a leave of absence. Told herself the same thing. But the scrubs went into the back of the closet, and the nursing license went into a drawer under a stack of takeout menus, and the days kept passing without her touching either one. Now it was Saturday, cold and gray, and the storage bill had climbed to $72 she didn't have. So she drove her mother's old sedan out to Route 4, and she parked beside the ambulance, and she sat in the car for 10 full minutes before she could make herself get out. The plan was simple. Clean it out. Tow it to the scrapyard on Miller Road. Clear maybe $250 after the towing fee. $250. That was the price her family had put on her father's secret. They had no idea. She unlocked the rear doors and pulled them open. The interior was dim, lit only by the gray morning filtering through the narrow windows. The smell reached her before her eyes adjusted. Antiseptic, old vinyl, and underneath all of it, something that was simply him. Decades of her father had settled into the metal and the upholstery. She could have closed her eyes and known where she was. She climbed inside, sat on the bench seat where a paramedic would ride beside a patient, ran her hand along the rail where an IV bag would hang. And then she noticed something. It was clean. Not just clean. Cared for. Cleaner than a rig this old had any right to be. The floor swept, the cabinets wiped down, even the stretcher rail had been oiled. Somebody had been maintaining this vehicle. Not casually. Recently, she opened the overhead cabinet. Empty, except for a clipboard with a handwritten checklist, dated 3 weeks before her father died. Tire pressure, fluid levels, battery, oxygen tank. The handwriting was his, shaky near the end, but hers to read like her own name. He had been checking on this ambulance until the last weeks of his life, a vehicle he hadn't driven on a call in 8 years. Why? The question landed in her chest and stayed there. She moved to the stretcher platform, and that was when she stopped. Because something was wrong, in a standard Type 3, the stretcher locks into a rail system bolted to the floor. 4 anchor points. Simple hardware. She'd ridden in enough of these during her career to know exactly what normal looked like. This was not normal. The stretcher mount had extra brackets. Custom welded steel reinforcements framing a section of floor about 2 feet by 3 feet. The bolts were heavy duty, not factory. Somebody had added these by hand. She knelt down, ran her fingers along the seam, and then she found the latch tucked against the wall rail. Painted the same color as the floor, nearly invisible, unless you were looking for it. Unless you knew it was there. Her heart started to climb. She worked the latch with her thumbnail. It resisted, then gave a small metallic click that sounded enormous in the quiet. The section of floor lifted on a hinge, and underneath was a steel compartment, welded directly to the chassis, about 6 inches deep, lined with a rubber mat to keep things from rattling. Inside were objects, not thrown in, not dumped, placed, arranged with care. Nadine reached in and pulled them out one at a time. Her hands were not steady. 3 leather journals, thick, worn. The covers scratched from years of handling. A bundle of envelopes tied with a rubber band, at least 30 of them, some yellowed with age, a bank passbook with a green cover, Ridgemont Savings and Loan, a manila envelope with the weight of legal documents inside, and at the very bottom, a plain white envelope with a single word written across the front in her father's hand. Madame. She sat back on the bench seat, hard. The object spread across the stretcher platform in front of her like evidence of a crime she didn't know had been committed. Outside, a truck pulled into the lot. An engine cut off. Somebody's radio drifted faintly through the morning air. Inside the ambulance, the only sound was her own breathing. She opened the passbook first. The account was in her father's name. The first deposit, $300. Dated more than 20 years ago. And after that, deposits came every single month. Sometimes $50, sometimes $100, never more than $200. The balance at the final entry, made 11 days before he died, $38,500. Nadine stared at the number until it blurred. Her father was a county paramedic. He earned $42,000 a year for most of his life. He never talked about savings. He drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it and complained about the price of coffee. Garrett had emptied the only account they knew about. This one had been hidden, built quietly over 2 decades, one small deposit at a time. She set the passbook down with hands that wouldn't quite work and reached for the manila envelope. Inside was a property deed. A commercial building, 614 Greer Street, Ridgemont. Purchased 9 years ago, $28,000. Cash. The owner listed was Walter T. Brennan, and below that, in her father's handwriting, a note held in trust. See Ellison and Parker, attorneys. Nadine had never heard of Greer Street. She had never heard of Ellison and Parker. Her father owned a building that no one in the family knew existed. Her whole life she thought she knew this man. She was beginning to understand she had never met him at all. She picked up the white envelope with her name on it, turned it over once. The back was blank. She slid her thumb under the flap and tore it open. 2 pages, handwritten in blue ink. The script steady in the early paragraphs, looser toward the end. Dear Nadine, if you found this compartment, then I'm gone. And you're sitting in the back of my ambulance wondering what your old man was up to all those years. That's fair. I should have told you. I wanted to, but every time I tried, the words came out sounding foolish or small, so I wrote them down instead, and I put them here, and I trusted that you'd find them. She had to stop, breathe. The page trembled in her hands. She kept reading. I've been using this ambulance on my days off for over 20 years. Tuesdays and Thursdays mostly, sometimes weekends. I drive out to the camps on the county line where the farm workers live. I go under the Route 9 overpass where the folks with no home sleep. I check on old Mrs. Rourke on Dalton Road. Because she's 84 and her nearest neighbor is 6 miles off and her children don't come, I bring the kit, the oxygen, whatever they need. I don't charge them and I don't file any paperwork. Nadine lowered the letter to her lap. She looked at the journals, picked up the first one, opened it to a random page. October the 14th. Drove to the orchard camp off Mill Creek. Treated a man named Mateo for a deep laceration to the forearm. Pruning saw. Irrigated and closed with butterfly strips, tetanus, from my own supply. His daughter, maybe 6, watched the whole thing and never flinched once. Tough kid. Left extra bandages. Back on Thursday. She turned the page, January the 9th. Route 9 overpass. Checked on Silas. The cough is worse. Told him he needs a chest x-ray. He won't go near a hospital. Gave him the last of my samples. Also, a woman named Sandra. Frostbitten toes. She had no socks. I gave her mine and drove home barefoot. Maeve would have laughed at that. Maifa, her mother's name. Dead 11 years now. Breast cancer. Nadine flipped forward, then back. Page after page after page. Hundreds of entries spanning more than 20 years. Each one dated. Each one specific. Names, ailments, treatments, follow-up plans. Her father had been running a one-man clinic out of this ambulance for 2 decades. And nobody knew. She went back to the letter. The building on Greer Street is mine. Paid cash from this account. I've been fixing it up a little at a time. New plumbing, some electrical. It's not much yet, but it could be a clinic. A real one. No insurance needed, no paperwork, no questions. Just a place where a person can walk in and get help. I know you left nursing. Your brother told me why. You never did. Nadine's breath caught. She had never told her father about Renata. She told HR it was a leave of absence. She told herself the same lie. She had not called her father to say what happened because she could not stand the thought of him knowing his daughter had failed at the very work he'd given his life to. But he knew. Garrett told him, and her father had written it down. In a journal she was only ever meant to find if she came looking. I'm not going to pretend I understand what you went through. I don't. But I know what it is to lose somebody you were supposed to save. I've carried that weight for 30 years. The trick isn't to put it down. You can't. The trick is to keep moving while you carry it. Nadine, I'm asking you to finish what I started. The building, the money, the ambulance, they're all yours. I put the property in a trust so your brother can't touch it. Ellison and Parker have the papers. This was always meant for you. The journals are the proof. Every patient, every visit, every life I tried to help. Read them when you're ready, and when you're ready, open the doors and keep going. I love you, I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry I wasn't better at saying either one while I was still here to say it. Dad, Nadine set the letter down on her knees, and she cried, not the quiet kind, the other kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere you've kept locked for a long time. She cried for her father, for the visits she never made, for the phone calls she cut short because she was too tired to talk, when really she was too ashamed, for the questions she never asked a man who came home every night and sat in his chair and carried a whole hidden world inside him. Outside, the scrapyard on Miller Road opened at 9. By 9, Nadine was still in the back of the ambulance. By 9:15, she was still reading. She did not call the scrapyard. She did not call the tow truck. She sat in the vehicle her brother called scrap metal, surrounded by her father's secrets, reading about strangers whose names she was only beginning to learn. And for the first time in 7 months, she felt something other than numb. The second journal had more entries than the first. Nadine turned past the pages she'd already skimmed and stopped at a date from 6 years back, April the 22nd. Camp past Mill Creek. Boy, maybe 10. High fever, rash on both arms. Mother said he'd been sick 3 days, but wouldn't take him in, afraid they'll ask for papers. Gave him children's Tylenol and amoxicillin from my supply. Showed her how to check for dehydration. Told her I'd be back Friday. She cried. Not over the fever, because somebody came. She turned the page. May the 3rd, Mrs. Rourke again. Found her on the kitchen floor when I let myself in. Left hip, possibly fractured. She begged me not to call it in. Said the last hospital trip cost $4,000 and she's still paying it off. Splinted the hip. Set her up on the couch with pillows so she wouldn't have to do the stairs. Brought groceries. Called Saturday. She's up and moving. Stubborn as ever. The entries kept coming. A teenager whose parents threw her out when they found out she was pregnant. Her father drove her to a women's shelter 2 counties over and checked on her twice a week for a month. A farm worker who broke 2 fingers and taped them with electrical tape because he couldn't miss a shift. Her father reset them, splinted them properly. Came back 3 days later to check the swelling. An old man under the overpass whose shin wound had gone septic. Her father cleaned and packed it every other day for 2 weeks until it closed. Each one the same careful pattern. Date, location, patient, symptoms, treatment, follow-up. He wasn't writing these for an institution. He was writing them for himself, or maybe for whoever came after he was gone. She closed the second journal and opened the third. It was the oldest. The leather darker, the spine cracked in 4 places. The first entry dated 21 years ago, 4 months after he bought the ambulance. March the 12th. First real run. Drove out to the orchards where the seasonal crew is camped. Tents and tarps. No running water. A man flagged me down. His boy fell off a ladder. Landed on his wrist. Clean break. Splinted it. Made a sling out of a pillowcase. Told the father the boy needs an x-ray. He said he'd think about it. Left what I had, ibuprofen, gauze, a bottle of water. Drove home and sat in the driveway 20 minutes. Maeve asked what was wrong. I told her nothing. It wasn't nothing. Going back next week, Maeve, her mother, dead 11 years. Either she had known about all of this and kept a secret, or her father had hidden it from everyone he loved. Nadine wasn't sure which was harder to sit with. She set the journals aside and reached for the bundle of letters. The rubber band snapped the second she pulled it. The envelope scattered across the platform. She picked up the nearest one. Lined notebook paper, folded in thirds. Slow, careful handwriting, each letter drawn separately. The handwriting of someone for whom English came hard. Dear Mr. Walt, you helped my daughter when she had the bad cough. The doctor said pneumonia in her lungs. You came to our house 2 times and brought the medicine and listened to her breathing. She is better now. She started school again. I have no money to pay you. So I made tamales and left them at the church. You are a good man. God sees what you do. The next letter, typed, clean white paper. Mr. Brennan, you probably don't remember me, but one November you drove me to the clinic at 3 in the morning after I called a crisis line and nobody else came. You stayed in the waiting room until somebody took me back. You didn't know me. You didn't ask questions. You just drove. I'm writing because I'm still here, and I wanted you to know that mattered. Another, on the back of a gas station receipt. 3 lines. You checked on me every Thursday for 2 years after my husband died. Nobody else did. Thank you. And one more. In a child's handwriting, Mr. Walt, you fixed my arm and it doesn't hurt anymore. Thank you. Below the words, a crayon drawing, a stick figure in red, standing next to a white box on wheels. Nadine read 12 letters before she had to stop. She put them down and folded her hands in her lap and sat there. Through the narrow windows, the light had shifted from gray to a pale gold. Outside, somebody dragged a trailer hitch across concrete. A dog barked once and quit. Inside the ambulance, nothing moved. She picked up her father's letter one more time, found the paragraph she kept returning to. The building on Greer Street is mine. She pulled out her phone and typed the address into the map. It placed a pin on the east side of town, past the tire shops and the dollar store, a stretch she had driven through 100 times without ever once slowing down. Her father had owned this for 9 years. He drove there on his weekends while she lived 30 minutes away, and not once, not one single time, did she think to ask what he did with his days off. She gathered everything: the journals, the letters, the passbook, the deed. She put them into a canvas bag she found behind the driver's seat. His initials were written on the strap in permanent marker, WB. She locked the ambulance. She climbed into her mother's sedan, and she drove east. Greer Street was quiet for a Saturday morning. Low commercial buildings on one side, a laundromat with a handwritten sign in the window, a tax preparer with seasonal hours taped to the glass, an auto repair shop across the way, 2 bay doors open, and 3 buildings down from the corner. The address. Brick front, plywood over the windows. A faded for lease sign still taped inside the glass door. But the door itself was solid, newer than the building around it. A small concrete lot to the right, cracked, but recently swept. Nadine parked and studied it through the windshield. Her father had owned this for 9 years. He came here on his days off, while she lived 30 minutes away. And she never once thought to ask. She got out, walked to the door. The key from the manila envelope fit the deadbolt. She turned it, heard it slide. Hey, the voice came from across the street. A man was walking out of the repair shop, wiping his hands on a rag. Late 50s, stocky. A work shirt with a name stitched over the pocket, Roy. He moved fast, his eyes on her, then on the building behind her. You're Walt's girl, he said when he reached her. Not a question. Nadine, do I know you? Roy Calloway. I own the shop across the street. He stuffed the rag in his back pocket. Your dad and I go back a long way. How long? Roy stopped a few feet off. He looked at the building, then back at her, and his face went serious in a way that made her chest tighten. Your father saved my life, he said. Nadine didn't move. Construction job on the overpass, years back. July. 102 degrees. I went down in the dirt and my heart just quit. And your dad, he wasn't even on shift. He was driving past in that ambulance, headed out to check on somebody at the camps. He saw my crew flagging him down, pulled over, started compressions, kept me going 11 minutes till the county unit got there. Nadine's voice came out small. He never told us. Of course he didn't. Roy shook his head slowly. That wasn't his way. He looked at the building, then at her. And he didn't ask her what she was doing there. He already knew. She could see it on his face. He'd been waiting for somebody, for her. There's a lot you don't know about your old man, Roy said quietly, and I think you came here to find out. Nadine looked at the door, standing half open, dark inside. Her father had built something behind that plywood, brick by brick, weekend by weekend, for years, and he hadn't built it for himself. He built it for her. She wasn't ready. 7 months since she'd held a stethoscope. 7 months of counting 4 minutes in the dark before sleep, all of it dressed up as a leave of absence when what it had always been was hiding. But she pushed the door the rest of the way open, and she stepped inside. The space was dim. One fluorescent tube buzzed overhead. The other was dark. Open floor plan. Exposed brick. A concrete floor swept so clean it almost shined. A reception counter ran along the left wall, built from plywood and 2x4s. Rough, but level, but square. The work of a man who measured twice and didn't rush. Behind it, the room divided into 2 smaller spaces, split by a half-finished wall. The plumbing was roughed in. Capped pipes came through the back wall where a sink would go. The electrical panel was new. Clean wiring, labeled breakers. Nadine walked it slowly. Roy stayed near the door, giving her room. In the far corner, a storage closet with a padlock. She tried the keys from the envelope. The third one fit. Inside were supplies. A blood pressure cuff, still in its packaging. A box of exam gloves, rolls of gauze, surgical tape, a stethoscope, mid-grade, the kind she would have picked herself for a general practice. And on the upper shelf, a folder, she opened it. Building codes for medical facilities, county permit applications, blank but organized in order. And a handwritten checklist in her father's hand. Exam room, 80 square feet minimum, waiting area, 6 chairs, accessible entrance, 36 inches of clearance, hands-free faucet at the sink. He had planned this down to the square foot. A paramedic who made $42,000 a year, studying building codes at his kitchen table after his shifts, when everyone thought he was asleep in his chair. He told me once, Roy said from the doorway, that the worst part of the job wasn't the emergencies. Nadine looked up. It was the drive home. He'd patch somebody up out at the camps or under the overpass. And then he'd get in the truck. And the whole way home, he'd be wondering if they were going to be okay, because they didn't have anywhere else to go after he left. Nadine closed the closet, and her phone rang. She pulled it out, looked at the screen. Garrett. She let it ring twice, then answered. I got a piece of Dad's forwarded mail. No hello. Garrett never wasted a hello. Property tax notice. Commercial building. East side of town. You know anything about that? It's Dad's. That's my point. It's part of the estate. You already divided the estate. I divided what we knew about. A pause. The sound of him recalculating. If Dad was hiding assets, that changes things. He wasn't hiding anything. Then what was he doing? Building something. Building what? A clinic. She looked around the room. At the cap pipes. The half-finished wall. A free clinic. Silence on the line. A long one. Then Garrett laughed. Short. Dry. The laugh of a man who has already decided you're wrong. A free clinic. Dad made $42,000 a year. He wasn't building clinics. And yet, she said, I'm standing inside. Another pause. We need to sit down with an attorney. He already sat down with an attorney. What? The property's in a trust. Ellison and Parker. You're welcome to call them. A trust. His voice flattened. Went cold. What kind of trust? The kind that does exactly what Dad wanted. Nadine, listen to me. Dad wasn't thinking clearly at the end. Secret bank accounts. Buying buildings. None of this is rational. And there it was. Because, of course, that was where he'd go. Because if their father was crazy, then the will was wrong. And if the will was wrong, then the money came back into play. She felt something harden in her chest. You took the house, she said, in 4 days. You had an agent walking through it while the funeral flowers were still on the kitchen table. Somebody had to handle things. You took the savings, you took the truck, you sold his tools to a pawn shop before I knew they were gone. Her voice was steady now, steadier than it had been in months. And then you handed me an ambulance you called scrap metal, and 3 boxes of what you swore was junk. Nadine, you don't get to call it scraps. After you already took everything worth keeping, Garrett breathed on the other end. She could hear him deciding what to say next. We're not done with this, he said. Yeah, Nadine said. We are. And she hung up. Her hand was steady. The words had come out calm, direct. The voice she used to use in the hospital when a room full of chaos needed one person to stop reacting and start thinking. She hadn't heard that voice in 7 months. She'd almost forgotten it was hers. Roy was leaning on the counter, watching her. He waited a beat after the call ended. Your dad picked the right one, he said quietly. Nadine put the phone in her pocket and didn't answer. Because she didn't believe it yet. Because believing it would mean she had to do something about it. She walked to the front window. A thin stripe of daylight pushed through a gap in the plywood and fell across the floor. There's somebody you should meet, Roy said. Opal Whitfield. Runs the food pantry at the church over on Cedar. Your dad spent every Tuesday and Thursday there for 20 years. She knew what he was doing better than anybody alive. How do I find her? She's there every day. Pantry hours or not. He pushed off the counter, headed for the door, then stopped. Tell her you're Walt's daughter. She'll know what that means. The church was a small brick building with a sloped roof. A hand-painted sign by the front door. Below it, a smaller sign. Food pantry. Tuesdays and Thursdays. It was Saturday, but the basement door was propped open with a cinder block. Voices drifted up from below. Nadine went down a set of concrete steps into a long room. Folding tables. Shelves lined with canned goods. Rice. Diapers. 2 women sorting donations into bins. And at the far end, behind a desk, a woman in her 70s. Silver hair pulled back. Reading glasses on a chain. The posture of someone who has been running things for a very long time and intends to keep doing it. Nadine crossed the room. Are you Opal Whitfield? The woman looked up. Depends who's asking. I'm Nadine Brennan, Walt's daughter. Opal set down her clipboard. She took off her glasses. And she studied Nadine's face for a long moment. The way you study a photograph of someone you've lost. Then she came around the desk, took Nadine by the arm, and guided her to a chair. Sit down, sweetheart, she said. I've been wondering when one of you would come. You knew about the ambulance, about what he was doing. Honey. Opal pulled a chair beside her and sat. I knew all of it. And then she started talking. She told Nadine how her father showed up one Tuesday, not long after he bought the rig, a first aid bag over his shoulder. He asked if she'd mind him sitting in the corner while folks came in for food. She told him he could sit wherever he liked. A week later, word had already spread, because that was how it worked with people who had nothing. Word moved faster than any flyer. And the word was that a paramedic was sitting at the back table on Tuesdays, and he didn't ask for papers, and he didn't ask for money, and he didn't turn anyone away. Some days I'd see 15, 20 people lined up at that table, Opal said. She pointed to a folding table by the kitchen. Mothers with sick babies. Old folks who couldn't get to a doctor. Men off the farms with no insurance and a wound that wouldn't close. He saw every single one. For 20 years, Nadine said, every Tuesday and Thursday. Like the sun coming up, Opal stood, walked to the far wall. Come look at this. A corkboard hung between the shelves, covered with photographs, community dinners, holiday drives, volunteers posing with donation boxes. Opal pointed to one near the top. A group of volunteers in the kitchen, smiling at the camera. And in the background, slightly out of focus, Walt Brennan stood at the folding table with a blood pressure cuff on an old woman's arm. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was reading the gauge. 7 years ago, Opal said. She pointed to another. A Thanksgiving dinner, tables full. Walt in the back row, handing a plate to a child. Another, a winter food drive. Walt carrying boxes in from the ambulance, his coat unzipped, his breath steaming in the cold. In every photograph, he was in the background. Working. He never wanted to be in the pictures, Opal said. I had to catch him when he wasn't looking. Nadine stood in front of that corkboard and looked at a man she shared a last name with and barely knew. He talked about you, Opal said behind her. Nadine turned. Not often. Your father wasn't one for long conversations. But some days, after we closed up, we'd have coffee. And he'd mention his kids. Opal paused. He said you had your mother's stubbornness and his instinct for people. Nadine's throat tightened. He also said you were hurting. Opal's voice softened. That you'd left nursing after something happened. He didn't say what. Nadine didn't answer. He didn't push. That wasn't his way. He just said he believed you'd come back. When you were ready, and there it was again. That phrase, when you're ready, like he'd known, like he'd seen the whole thing coming from the other side of whatever distance she'd put between them. They sat together a while longer. Opal told her how the whole network worked. The pantry was the center. But Walt drove out to the camps, the overpass, the isolated farms on the county line. He kept his supplies stocked a little at a time, gauze from the pharmacy, antibiotics from sample programs, a blood pressure monitor he'd bought at a garage sale for $2. He'd built the whole operation the same way he built the clinic, piece by piece, when nobody was looking. Some men build monuments, Opal said. Your father built trust. It's harder to see, but it lasts longer. And then people started coming. Not for the pantry. It was Saturday. The pantry was closed. They came for her because word still moved faster than anything. And the word now was that Walt Brennan's daughter was sitting in the church basement asking questions. A young woman came first, a toddler on her hip. She stood at the top of the steps and said she'd heard Walt Brennan's daughter was here. Opal waved her down. She was 24 now. 3 years ago, her baby had come 6 weeks early. She'd been at the camp past Mill Creek with no car and no phone. A neighbor ran to the road and flagged down the ambulance going by. And Walt delivered the baby right there, on the floor of the rig, kept the child breathing, kept the mother calm, drove them both to the hospital. The baby, the toddler she was holding right now, weighed 3 pounds at birth. The doctor said the first 20 minutes made the difference, the young woman said. She shifted the child higher on her hip. Your father was the first 20 minutes. Nadine couldn't speak. After her, an older man came down the steps, slow, one hand on the rail, a farmer. He told Nadine his wife had been bitten by a rattlesnake working in their garden. They lived 40 minutes from the nearest emergency room, and Walt had been checking on somebody down the road, heard the call, drove to the farm, treated the bite, kept her stable, followed the ambulance all the way to the hospital. My wife is alive, the farmer said, because of your father. He cleared his throat. I tried to pay him. He told me to put it in the pantry jar instead. One by one they came, and one by one, Nadine listened. And somewhere in the middle of it, she stopped feeling like a woman cleaning out an old vehicle for scrap, and started feeling like a woman standing inside the shape of her father's whole secret life. A shape so much bigger than the tired man in the recliner. So much bigger than 2 eggs and wheat toast and black coffee. She drove home that night with a canvas bag on the passenger seat. And she didn't sleep. She read. She finished the 2nd journal, then the 3rd. Then she went back to the 1st, reading slower this time, catching names that matched the people she'd just met. Dates that lined up with stories she just heard. Follow-up notes showing her father going back week after week to check on someone the rest of the world had forgotten. And then, near the back of the 1st journal, she found an entry that stopped her cold because the ink was different, darker, the handwriting shakier. He'd added it late, long after the pages around it. And the date was 7 months ago. Nadine called tonight. She sounds tired. I can hear it in her voice. The way she trails off in the middle of a sentence and then catches herself. She lost a patient and she blames herself. She won't say it, but I know. I've carried the same weight 30 years. Her name was Dorothy, 61, cardiac arrest on a highway shoulder. I got there in time. My hands just weren't fast enough. I think about her every year on the anniversary. Nadine won't stay away forever. She's too much like her mother to stay gone from people who need help. And when she comes back, maybe she'll find what I've been building. Maybe she'll understand why I never stopped. Nadine set the journal down on her kitchen table and pressed both hands flat against the surface, like she needed something solid to hold her up, because she had never told him about Renata. She'd told HR a lie. She'd told herself the same lie. She had not called her father to say what happened, because she could not bear the thought of him knowing. But he knew. He heard it in the way she trailed off mid-sentence, the way only a parent hears the thing a child is trying so hard to hide. And he didn't push. He didn't offer advice she wasn't ready for. He didn't say a single word about it. He just wrote it down. In a journal she was only ever meant to find if she came looking. And then he picked up a hammer and kept building her a reason to come back. The tears came again. But these were different, deeper, pulled up from a place she'd kept sealed shut for months. She cried for him, for the calls she cut short, for the conversations she never started, for a man who knew his daughter was drowning and answered, not with words, but with lumber and pipe and a building permit. She cried until there was nothing left, and then she sat in the quiet with the unpaid bills on the counter and the scrubs in the back of the closet and the license in the drawer she hadn't opened in 7 months. And she did not feel numb. The next morning she drove back to Greer Street. Roy was at the reception counter, sanding the surface smooth. He'd let himself in with a key her father had given him years ago. Opal arrived a half hour later with a folder she'd been keeping. Newspaper clippings about health access in the county. Articles she'd saved, she said, because she always figured somebody would need them someday. They were standing in the main room, Opal pointing at the wall where an exam room could go. When a silver SUV pulled into the lot, Garrett got out of the driver's side, his wife stepped out of the passenger seat, and a third man climbed out of the back, carrying a clipboard and a tape measure. "What is this?" Nadine said, flat. Garrett walked toward her. "I brought an appraiser. We need to know what this property's worth before we discuss options." "There are no options." "There are when Dad's estate includes property nobody disclosed." He looked past her, into the building, then at Roy, then at Opal. "Who are they?" "People who actually knew Dad," Nadine said. His wife stayed by the SUV, arms crossed, studying the building with an expression that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with arithmetic. "I'm not trying to fight," Garrett said, "but look at it from my side. Dad had a secret account, a secret building, a secret life, and every dollar of it goes to you. His son gets a house that barely cleared the mortgage, and you get the real inheritance. How is that fair? You took the house in 4 days. Somebody had to. You kept the savings, you kept the truck, you sold his tools, she held his eyes, and then you handed me scrap metal. So no, you don't get to talk to me about fair." Garrett's jaw tightened. Behind him, the appraiser shifted his weight, looked at the ground, wishing clearly that he were anywhere else. "I've already called an attorney," Garrett said. "I want the trust reviewed. If Dad was making these decisions without telling his family, there are grounds to challenge his capacity." And that was the word, capacity. He was going to say their father was out of his mind. Roy stepped into the doorway beside Nadine. "Your father was clear-headed every day I knew him," Roy said. 12 years. And not once did he forget a name, miss an appointment, or make a decision he hadn't thought all the way through. "I wasn't talking to you," Garrett said. "I don't care." Roy's voice never rose. "I kept that ambulance running for years. I watched the man plan every inch of this building. He knew exactly what he was doing, and I've got the maintenance records to prove it. Dated, signed." Opal moved to Nadine's other side. "Your father came to my pantry twice a week for longer than most people keep a job," she said. "He treated hundreds of people. He was sharp and precise and kind. Every single visit," she lifted her chin. "If you want to question that man's mind, young man, you'll have to do it in front of every soul who knew him. And there are more of us than you think." Garrett looked from Roy to Opal to his sister. 3 people standing in a doorway, none of them moving. His wife called from the car. "Garrett, let's go." He pointed at Nadine. One finger. "This isn't over. He was my father too," he said, "and he left me nothing that mattered." "He left you everything you thought you wanted," Nadine said. "The house, the money, the things you could sell." She paused. "He left me what he thought I needed. Those are different gifts, Garrett." And he knew the difference. Garrett held her gaze a second longer. Then he turned and walked back to the SUV. The appraiser followed, tape measure still clipped to his belt. Never opened. They pulled out of the lot and turned south. Roy, Opal, and Nadine stood in the doorway until the car disappeared. "He'll file something," Nadine said. "Let him," Opal said. An hour later, Nadine's phone rang again. A woman's voice. Professional. Calm. "Miss Brennan, I'm with Ellison and Parker. I was your father's attorney." Nadine sat on the edge of the reception counter. "He mentioned your firm in his letter. Your father established an irrevocable trust 7 years ago. You are the sole trustee. The property is designated for community health services. The trust cannot be dissolved, sold, or redirected. And the terms were drafted to withstand exactly the kind of challenge your brother is considering." Nadine closed her eyes. "This morning I explained that structure to him," the attorney went on. "Your father anticipated a dispute. He included provisions for it. The savings account is covered too, designated for renovation and operating costs. The building, the money, and the ambulance are yours, free of any estate claim." "He planned for all of it," Nadine said. "He came to our office once a year, for 7 years, to review the terms. His last visit was 8 weeks before he passed. He was lucid, organized, and very specific." A pause. "He also left a note in the file." Nadine opened her eyes. "What did it say?" It said, "She'll be scared. Tell her that's normal." Nadine sat very still, because of course he did. Because he knew her. Even from the other side of the distance she'd built, he knew exactly who she was and exactly what she would feel. Standing in this room, "Thank you," she managed. She hung up and held the phone in her lap. Roy was by the door. Opal was in a folding chair she'd carried in from her car. "The trust is airtight," Nadine said. "Garrett can't touch it." "Good," Opal said. She stood, collected her folder, and put a warm hand on Nadine's arm. "You don't have to decide anything today, but when you're ready, you know where we are." They left, and Nadine was alone in the building. The fluorescent tube buzzed. Traffic hummed on the road outside. A truck downshifted at the corner, and the stripe of light on the floor had moved again. Different day, different angle, same room. She walked to the storage closet and opened it, and she picked up the stethoscope, still sealed in its plastic. She turned it over in her hands. The weight was familiar. Everything about it was familiar. Her whole life was in that small, simple object, and so was her father's. She held it for a long time, standing in the room he'd built for her, terrified, and still, and not leaving. Nadine called Roy the next morning. "I need help," she said. "I don't even know where to start." "I do," Roy said. "I'll bring my tools." He showed up before noon, a pickup full of equipment. 2 men from his crew riding in the bed. They walked the space together. Roy checked the plumbing, tested the electrical, walked the perimeter, eyeing the foundation the way only a man who builds things can. "Your dad did solid work," he said. "Bones are good. We finished the interior walls. Install the sink. Get a bathroom in that back corner. Run the last stretch of wiring." He nodded to himself. "I can do most of it." "I can't pay you," Nadine said. "I didn't ask you to." Opal came by that afternoon with a list because she'd been on the phone all morning, calling everyone in the pantry network, a retired electrician who owed Walt years of free blood pressure checks, a plumber whose granddaughter Walt had treated for bronchitis one winter, a woman who worked at the county permit office and knew exactly how to move an application from the bottom of a stack to the top. "Your father helped these people," Opal said. "Now they want to help back. Let them." And here is the thing about a town like this. You think nobody's watching. You think a quiet man doing quiet good just disappears into the noise. Except he doesn't. because every person he ever helped remembered, and they'd been waiting 20 years for a chance to pay it back. Within a week, the building started to change. Interior walls went up. The bathroom took shape in the back corner. Roy's crew connected the plumbing and mounted the sink. The electrician finished the wiring and added outlets where the exam rooms would go. And Nadine worked, too. She swept. She cleaned. She painted. She drove to the hardware store for supplies and carried drywall and hauled scrap to the dumpster Roy had rented. During the day, she worked the building. At night, she read the journals. And then, on a Thursday, a girl showed up. She was standing in the doorway when Nadine looked up. 20s, hands shoved in the pockets of a county EMS jacket, looking at the half-finished room with an expression Nadine couldn't quite read. "Can I help you? My dad sent me." She nodded across the street, toward the repair shop, said you might need an extra set of hands. "You're Roy's daughter, Bertie." She held out her hand. "He told me about the clinic, about what your dad was building." "Did he tell you everything?" Bertie looked around the room, at the labeled cabinets, the stacked supplies, then back at Nadine, and her face changed, settled into something Nadine recognized. The face of a person who has just learned something about their own life and found out it was a different story than the one they'd always told. "He told me your father delivered me," Bertie said. Nadine went still. 24 years ago. Winter storm. The roads closed. My mom went into labor and my dad lost his head. And a paramedic drove through the snow in an ambulance and delivered me on the kitchen floor. He never told you who. I grew up hearing the story. But nobody ever said a name. It was always just the paramedic. Bertie's voice caught, just slightly. He was there, the night I was born. And I never even knew his name. She said it plain, still absorbing the shape of it. "I'm training to be an EMT," she said. "And if you need help getting this place ready, I want to be part of it." Nadine looked at this young woman, who was alive because of her father, standing in the building her father built, wanting to give her own life to the same work. "We need all the help we can get," Nadine said. Bertie started that afternoon. And she was good. She organized the exam rooms with the precision of someone trained for emergencies, labeled every cabinet, drew up an inventory, taped a supply checklist to the inside of the closet door. And when she found Walt's handwritten planning notes on the shelf, she read them carefully and set them back, exactly where they'd been. The lawyer's letter arrived on Friday, Garrett's attorney, challenging the trust. On grounds of diminished capacity, the letter cited their father's secretive financial behavior and his failure to disclose assets to family members as evidence that he was not of sound mind. When he created the trust, Nadine read it standing at the reception counter and set it down without a word. Roy saw her face, walked over. "What happened?" "Garrett filed. Says Dad was incompetent." Roy didn't say anything. He just walked out to his truck and came back with a cardboard box. Inside were his maintenance records, every service visit on the ambulance, documented, dated, signed by Walt, oil changes, tire rotations, fluid checks, and each record had a note in her father's handwriting about where he planned to go next. Which camp? Which patient needed a follow-up? "Your father wrote these himself," Roy said. "Clear hand, specific details, every single time." He set the box on the counter. "Bring them to the hearing." Opal contributed her own file. The pantry sign-in sheets, showing Walt's attendance week after week. The photographs, dates written on the back, signed statements from 3 volunteers who'd worked beside him for years. And the attorney from Ellison and Parker submitted his medical records. Annual physicals, blood work, cognitive assessments, all normal. The final checkup, 10 weeks before he died, documented him as alert, oriented, fully competent. The hearing was on a Tuesday afternoon at the county courthouse. Not a trial, a review, requested by Garrett's attorney to decide whether the trust should be opened for examination. The room was small, 2 tables at the front, a bench, 6 rows of chairs. Nadine sat at the right table with her attorney, Garrett at the left with his lawyer, his wife behind him in the first row, perfectly still. And then Nadine turned around and looked at the back of the room, and her breath caught because the rows were full. The young mother from the church was there, the toddler asleep on her lap, the farmer and his wife, Opal, sitting upright, hands folded, Roy in a clean shirt, Bertie beside him, two women from the pantry, an older man Nadine didn't recognize, and beside him, a woman in scrubs who must have come straight off a shift. People she had never met, people who had heard what was happening and had decided to be in the room. For him, Garrett's attorney went first. He talked about secretive behavior, undisclosed assets, a pattern, he said, inconsistent with sound decision-making. He used a lot of words, careful, lawyerly words, designed to turn a good man's quiet kindness into evidence of a broken mind. Then the attorney from Ellison and Parker responded, with the evidence, the medical records, the maintenance logs, the pantry sheets, the photographs, 7 years of annual trust reviews, each one documented, each one showing a man who was engaged, specific, intentional. And then the judge did something he didn't have to do. He allowed brief statements from the gallery. The farmer went first. He stood up slow and described the night his wife was bitten, how Walt arrived in 12 minutes, how he treated the bite and kept her stable through the 40-minute drive, how she was alive because a man she barely knew refused to let her die. The young mother spoke next, her voice quiet, but it carried. She described her baby coming early at the camp, Walt arriving in the ambulance, delivering the child on the floor of the rig, the doctors telling her the first 20 minutes had saved her daughter's life. The older man stood. He said Walt had treated chronic wounds on his legs for 3 years, driving to his house every week because he couldn't walk to a clinic, never filed a form, never asked for $1, just showed up with his bag and did the work. One by one, they rose. A woman whose son Walt had talked down from something dark at 3 in the morning, a man whose broken ribs Walt taped and watched for 6 weeks, a grandmother whose insulin Walt picked up from a pharmacy 30 miles away when her ride fell through. They didn't talk about the trust. They didn't use legal words. They didn't mention financial disclosures. They talked about a man who showed up on the worst day of their lives and never asked for anything back. And then it happened. The thing nobody saw coming, because the older man Nadine hadn't recognized stood up again, and this time he turned not toward the judge, but toward Garrett. My name is Earl Maddox, he said. I work for the county. Building inspections. Nadine's attorney sat up straight, because 2 weeks earlier, the clinic's permit had been flagged, held up, a sudden problem with the inspection that nobody could explain, and Nadine had wondered, quietly, whether someone had made a phone call, whether someone with a stake in the building failing had reached out to the right office. 3 weeks ago, Earl said, I got a call asking me to find a reason to deny the permit on the Greer Street building, to slow it down, make it hard. He paused. I won't say who made the call, but I think there are people in this room who could guess. The room was dead, silent, and I want to tell you why I didn't do it. Earl's voice shook, just slightly. 11 years ago, my daughter had a seizure at our house, out past the county line, and the ambulance was 40 minutes out, and a man drove up in an old rig, off duty, on his own time, because he heard it on a scanner he kept in his truck, and he kept my little girl alive until the county unit came. Earl looked at Nadine. I never knew his name either, until I saw the address on that permit, and I put it together. His jaw worked. I am not going to be the man who shuts down Walt Brennan's clinic. I don't care who's calling. I'd sooner lose the job. He sat down, and Nadine looked at her brother, and Garrett, for the first time, could not look back, because his wife had gone white, and his attorney was very carefully studying his own notes, and the whole room now understood exactly who had made that call. The judge reviewed the evidence and dismissed the challenge. The trust was valid. Nadine was the sole trustee. The matter was closed. Garrett's attorney collected his files and left. His wife stood and moved toward the door. Car keys already out, but Garrett stayed in his chair. A moment, two, then he stood and walked toward the back of the room. He passed the rows of people who'd come for his father. He didn't stop, he didn't speak. But as he passed the end of Nadine's row, he slowed, and their eyes met. His face was tight, jaw set, and underneath the frustration, Nadine saw something she had never seen on her brother before. A crack. The first hairline fracture and the certainty he'd carried since the day after the funeral. Then he pushed through the door and was gone. Nadine stood in the hallway and watched him cross the parking lot. His wife was already in the SUV. He stood at the driver's door a long moment, one hand on the roof, looking at nothing. Then he got in and started the engine and turned south. And she did not know if he was coming back. And she did not know which answer she hoped for. 3 months later, spring. The building looked different now. Fresh paint on the brick, pale blue, white trim, the plywood gone from the windows, replaced with glass that let the morning light pour across the waiting room floor. Inside, the walls were finished, the exam rooms complete, the bathroom tiled and working. Roy had built the reception desk himself from reclaimed barnwood, sanded and sealed until the grain showed through like honey. Opal had donated 6 chairs for the waiting area, mismatched, but sturdy. Bertie had stocked the exam rooms with everything from tongue depressors to blood pressure cuffs, and the ambulance sat in the lot, cleaned, polished. Roy had given it one last service. The paint still showed its age, but the chrome was bright, and the engine turned over on the first try. Nadine renewed her nursing license in March. She studied at her kitchen table, her father's journals stacked beside her textbooks. She took the exam on a Wednesday morning and passed. When the envelope came from the state board with her active credentials inside, she sat in her car in the post office parking lot and held it in her lap for a long time, because the last time she held that license, she'd put it in a drawer under takeout menus and told herself she was done. She'd been wrong. She drove it straight to the building and taped it to the wall behind the reception desk, next to a framed photograph Opal had pulled from the corkboard, the one of her father in the background checking a patient's blood pressure, not looking at the camera. The sign went up on a Saturday. Roy and 2 of his crew bolted it above the new glass door, white letters on a blue background. Brennan Community Health, walk-ins, welcome. No one turned away. Nadine stood on the sidewalk and looked up at it, her father's name, on a building he bought with money nobody knew about, built with his own hands. On weekends, nobody noticed. For people nobody else was helping. She stood there until her eyes burned. And then she went inside to get ready for Monday. Opening morning was warm and clear. Roy came before 7 to check the plumbing one last time. Opal came with a coffee urn and a tray of pastries from the bakery on Main. Bertie was already inside, running her supply checklist, wearing the EMS jacket and a name badge she'd printed herself. By 9, the waiting room had people in it. The young mother from the church, her daughter walking now, tugging at the hem of Opal's apron, the farmer and his wife by the window, 2 women from the pantry by the coffee urn talking low, an older couple from the hearing in the corner, holding hands. They hadn't come because they were sick. They came because this place existed, and they wanted to be here. When the doors opened, and then Garrett walked in. He stood in the doorway, hands at his sides, a jacket, no tie. He looked around the waiting room, at the faces, at the framed license on the wall, at the exam rooms through their open doors. His wife was not with him. The room went quiet. Nadine came out from behind the desk. "Can we talk?" Garrett said. She walked past him. Out the front door, he followed. They stopped beside the ambulance, parked at the edge of the lot, the morning sun warm on the old metal. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Garrett looked at the ambulance, then the building, then the ground. "I sat in that hearing," he said, "and I listened to those people, every one of them, and I realized something I should have figured out a long time ago." He stopped, started again. "I didn't know him." Nadine waited. "I thought I did. I knew a man who went to work and came home tired, and I never once asked what tired him out. His voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing him everything. He built all of this, spent 20 years helping people I'll never meet. And he hid it from us because he knew exactly what I'd have said. He looked at the clinic. He was right. I'd have called it a waste. Garrett, let me finish. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a white envelope. I sold the house for $260. My share, after the mortgage and the costs, came to about $24,000. He held the envelope out. This is half. Nadine took it. Inside was a check, $12,000, made out to Brennan Community Health. It's not enough, Garrett said. I know that. But it's a start. She looked at the check, then at her brother. He was not the man who dangled the ambulance keys over the kitchen counter 3 months ago. He was not entirely someone new, either. He was just a man standing in a parking lot, trying to do something he didn't have a script for. And it was costing him every ounce of the certainty he usually carried. Thank you, she said. He nodded. He didn't try to hug her. And she didn't try to hug him. That would come later, or it wouldn't. But he was here. And for now, that was enough. He walked to his car. And this time, Nadine did not wonder if he was coming back. Inside, the waiting room had settled into a warm hum. Roy adjusting a cabinet hinge, Bertie restocking gloves, Opal sitting with the farmer's wife talking about something that made them both laugh. And then the front door opened. A young woman came in, heavily pregnant, one hand resting low on her belly, her face pale, her eyes wide and tired. The face of someone who'd been up since before dawn, frightened and alone. Is this the clinic? She said. A woman at the laundromat told me about it. She said you don't turn people away. Nadine felt her own heart go still, because here it was. The thing she had been afraid of for 7 months. A pregnant woman walking through her door. Because Renata had been a pregnant woman, and Nadine had held her hand and told her, hold on, and the grip had gone slack anyway. And for one terrible second, she was back in that room, counting 4 minutes, hearing the monitors, feeling her own hands start to shake. Except this woman was standing and breathing and looking at Nadine with the only thing in the world she had left, hope. And Nadine heard her father's voice from the letter, from the dark of the ambulance. The trick isn't to put it down. You can't. The trick is to keep moving while you carry it. That's right, Nadine said, and her voice did not shake. Come on in. She brought the woman into the first exam room. She washed her hands at the sink her father had roughed in, the one Roy connected. She pulled a stool close and sat, and she did not let go of the woman's eyes. How far along? 32 weeks. I haven't seen a doctor. Not once. I couldn't afford it. The woman's chin trembled. I felt cramping this morning, and I got so scared. And I didn't know where else to go. You came to exactly the right place, Nadine said. She took the stethoscope from the counter, the one her father had bought, and stored in that closet, sealed in plastic, until the week she'd finally opened it and fitted the earpieces for the first time. Standing in the room he'd built for her, she warmed the bell in her hand, pressed it gently to the woman's belly, and she listened. And there it was, a heartbeat, fast, strong, steady, the most beautiful sound in the world. Your baby, Nadine said. And she had to stop, because her own throat had closed. Your baby is fine. Strong heartbeat. The cramping is most likely from dehydration and stress. We're going to get you some fluids, and we're going to get you on a schedule. And I am not going to let you go through the rest of this alone. The woman started to cry. I don't have any money, she whispered. I know, Nadine said. That's why we're here. No charge, not now, not ever. You come back next week and the week after, and every week until that baby's in your arms. She showed the woman how to count the kicks, how to check for swelling, the same way her father had taught a frightened mother at the camps 20 years ago. She gave her electrolyte solution from the shelf and a follow-up card and a phone number that rang straight to Nadine's own cell, day or night. And when she walked the woman to the door, the young mother turned and took both of Nadine's hands. Thank you, she said. I didn't know where else to go. You're in the right place, Nadine said. She watched her cross the lot, to an old sedan with a cracked taillight and a car seat already buckled in the back, waiting. The woman got in, pulled out, and turned onto the road, and Nadine stood in the doorway of the clinic her father had spent 20 years building toward. She thought about Renata. She would always think about Renata. Those 4 minutes were not going anywhere. She would carry them for the rest of her life. But she finally understood what her father had been trying to tell her. You don't carry the weight so it crushes you. You carry it so it makes you gentle, so that the next frightened woman who walks through your door finds a person who knows exactly how much there is to lose and refuses to lose her too.